So we will have 40 minutes together to try and tackle this huge question. And just before we get to the idea of understanding what this kind of accelerating technologies might do to the future, I wanted to introduce really briefly the reason of that talk. And to start with, I wanted to talk about Charles Dickens. Because at the beginning of A Tale of Two Cities, it says something that to me recalls the time we live in. He says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And to me, the time we live in is exactly like that. At some point, we do believe that it is the best of times because on a large history scale, it is true that the world we live in is a better place to live maybe than it was before, safer, more educated. And the accelerating technologies we will talk about this morning could maybe, through collective intelligence also, solve urgent challenges that we face, wicked problems, and so forth. But on the other hand, it is true that these revolutions that we talk so much about, some people might say we don't see yet the concrete positive impact. And a lot of political tensions actually arise. So a lot of people may say that the future is already here. Truth is, if we follow the quotes of Gibson, it is here but not evenly distributed. And how can we live in a world in which we try Hyperloop in Vegas, but people are still dying of thirst in parts of Africa? Even in developed countries, a lot of us actually fear the future ahead of us because sometimes of dangerous myth and sometimes for very concrete bad use of technology. So it would not be tech for good, but tech for bad sometimes. And also something I'm kind of pissed at every time is the fact that we also do tech for nothing, right? It seems that with all this superpower that we have, we are struggling with techno-gadgets and, you know, building Facebook for cats or autonomous spinning top, 2P autonome, that just makes want to understand what do we want to do with this future. So it feels like an age of earthquakes. And to me, because it's too difficult to understand the present, what we will propose for this session is that first, we will try and see positive and possible futures that we might head to through mostly AI and nanotechnologies. And then, second part, we will try and see retrospectively, like backcasting from these futures, what we can do today to make them happen or to prevent them. So, I would love to hear you first on a kind of 2-minute free speech to have a vision maybe of what the future might look like for you. Let's say you're free to have a 2050 horizon or 2030. It's up to you. And Steffi, I would love if you could introduce your vision for this future with technologies.
Many thanks, Guillaume. So I think that we need to look at something that is a lot more socially inclusive. The reason for that is that we're no longer just users of a technology, we are part of the technology itself. As policymakers, we're quite often referring to cyber, social, physical systems. So the social is in there as part of what drives the technology forward. We have network effects, and we actually have entire technologies that work on having the information from individuals and putting it into the data storage and using it. So what we have, society is now an integral part of the technology we're developing. And the new technologies, and that is, I think, also why we're talking about it now, is we are more and more affected by technology. So the social impact, which is what a lot of people say is foreseeable, social impact of technologies is going to be stronger than any other technology we have rolled out before. And that means that if humans and society are a part of technology as we're advancing it, and are also much more impacted, they should also have a much bigger responsibility in it. So what we need to get right is we need to make it more inclusive. We need to be able to hold a conversation earlier about it, an inclusive conversation with people who would otherwise not have been asked to comment on their feelings, their emotion, their perception about this technology. And the one thing we need to take into account is that there is a responsibility connected to how we communicate about it, and that is also responsibility of the media, because the media is pushing information out and people need to somehow make up their opinion about it. So that's a responsibility for everybody. And we also need to include in every one of these risk assessments and considerations that we do a consideration of the risk of not advancing that technology.
Thank you. Cedric, you are in charge those months of a great mission for AI for the French government. So you meet a lot of amazing people.
Including you.
Thank you. And I'm sure you've had a lot of people sharing their vision about what the future of technology, especially AI, might look like. For now, what can you say about maybe the fears that we have, also the hopes that it embodied, and what's your personal view on this?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be part of this future-oriented event. Let me start by saying that last time I was here, it was part of the event about virtual reality and augmented reality that took place here, and I made this experiment in which they strap you to a kind of robot and make you fly like a bird with the illusion of even the wind going through your face and so on. And this is interesting, but on the other hand, what we've seen so far are a lot of interesting games and gimmicks for this kind of futuristic things. And it's a real question, how the technology and these new ways of conceiving devices will make their way in our intimate work, thoughts, science, whatever we are interested in. I have started, when I was director of Institut Poincaré, a program in which augmented reality type technologies would be incorporated in a way to communicate and explain mathematics to people who are non-specialists. And I think to find the right ways to get the good impact will require a lot of research. It's true also in all kinds of AI. It will not just save the world. It will save the world only if you find the right ways to incorporate the right procedure, the right process between us and the algorithm. Let me insist on just one thing of the future that I hope. I will not talk about the usual things that we hope about medicine, transport, communication, and so on, but about the impact in science. And it's great that I am sitting next to Stuart Russell, who is the author, among other things, of this beautiful book on artificial intelligence, which has been on the desk of every student of AI for a long time. And as a science, AI still has a lot of virgin territory to uncover. I mean, from the pragmatic point of view, we've seen successes that were unbelievable in the past few years, but when you ask the experts, people like Yann Lequin or others who are at the forefront of applying the methods, they will tell you, we don't know why it works. There's so much research, so much to find about the right concepts, and maybe it's whole brand new territories of science which are going to open when we explore and go deeper into them.
Great. Thank you so much. So Stuart, indeed, you are kind of one of the main people we have today in research for AI, and so it's a real honor to have you here. I know you love Paris also, so it's great to know that France is back in every field. And so you had a talk this year at TED around human-compatible AI. How do you envision a positive future that I think you're one of them that actually has the vision to help us towards it? And how do you feel we also might block the dystopian views, maybe of singularity, things like that, that we hear so much about with concrete and rational thinking, maybe?
So I think the metaphor is not weather forecasting, but navigation.
Okay.
And this is the right way to think about it. We have to steer our way through these rocks, these negative outcomes that people talk about. one of the very early rocks that we have to face is autonomous weapons. And in 2 weeks in Geneva, the United Nations is holding the first formal steps of creating a treaty to ban weapons that can choose where to go and who to kill. And I think that's a positive step, so that's a good sign. When Elon Musk and Bill Gates and even Alan Turing talk about the time when AI capabilities exceed those of humans, the concern there is very straightforward. It's the same concern that the gorillas had about humans, right? Was it a good idea for their ancestors to create the human race? Probably not. If you're a gorilla, your future is a little bit bleak because of the presence of humans on the planet. So how do we avoid being in the situation of gorillas? And I believe, and I'll explain this afternoon in more detail, that there is a way to reconceptualize AI so that rather than being a technology into which we put objectives, and then the technology optimizes those objectives, instead, the technology is responsible for figuring out what our real objectives are and helping us achieve those. So if we navigate through all these rocks and we get to the other side where we have figured out how to incorporate AI technology into our society and our lives in a healthy way, I think we have a golden age for humanity. But I also think that our cultural forces have to be deployed to help with this process. And I mean people who write novels, people who write poetry, people who create movies, to explain to everyone how they should think about what's going to happen. And I think actually, I know a lot of AI people criticize the movie industry because in all the movies, the AI becomes conscious and decides that it hates human beings, which is probably not the right way to think about it. But when you see movies like Wall-E, where they depict what happens when AI is too helpful, right, where life is given to everyone on a plate, and they sit around and they get fatter and fatter. I think that's a great metaphor. And this is the kind of thing that we need to be doing on a much larger scale if our society is going to thrive in cooperation with AI technologies.
Thank you so much. Laurent, you wrote a book called La guerre des intelligences, The War of Intelligence, that was just released last month. You're really interested in maybe at some point the opposition between human intelligence and artificial intelligence in specific fields. What is your vision of this future again?
We want a positive future. All of us. But we face a technological tsunami, and we are not prepared. For one major reason, scientists are in their labs, and politician guys deal with past issue, with old concerns, and not about the future and technological real issues. Apart of that, we have writers, movie makers who depict a dystopian future with existential risks, rogue AI killing all the humanity in a minute. If we really want a good future, we must merge politicians and scientists. We need to change radically our point of view and the organization of politics. Because technology is not a technical issue. Technology is not a technological issue. Technology is a political issue. We must deal about politics. Politics, politics, politics. Today, there is a huge gap between political world and scientist world. There are some exceptions, hopefully. Cedric is the best exception in this bad vision of the political landscape. So, I think that as geeks in this room, we must enter the political field. We must enter the political battlefield. We must to push politicians in the technical area. And it is an ideological battle. If we fail, we will get a bad future, especially for educational reasons, because we will get the nightmare described by Harari in Homo Deus, gods are useless, gods who understand the new world, who understand or master AI, on new technologies like NBIC, nanotechnology, biotechnology, informatics, and cognitive sciences. And on the other hand, useless. We will be lost in a very, 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 very complex world, because the major consequence of AI is that the world in the future will be very, 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 very complex, because AI will be free. And when a product is free, you put a lot of it in production, in output organization. In the future, we will put a lot of AI in the world, and consequently, the world will be very, very complex. If we refuse to understand the future, if we refuse to enter the political world, we will get a dystopia. The future could be bright, could be positive, but we need to work in order to change politicians. And it's an urgent concern. We must act today.
Thank you so much. So I told you we had the best panel. I think we all agree now. If I may want to get into some details around AI and nanotech, I'd love to share an experience that I had last year on this idea of future, utopias, dystopias, and so on. So at a research seminar at École Normale Supérieure, we opened a session called Love Machine, in which we wanted to basically question the future of AI through fictions, because like sci-fi was so big to influence us so far. What's the next fiction that we want to build? And we were very lucky inside of Paris Sciences Lettres to have had more than 2,000 people writing a short fiction about the future of AI. And the thing is, most of them writing were in between 20 to 35-year-olds. And because the program was called Love Machine, obviously we wanted to give a positive view and positive vision on human and machine together, building new things. But honestly, 90% of the texts we received were about Terminator. And so it was a complete fail, my bad. But it was also really frightening to us to understand how is it possible to have new role models, new examples, new fictions that we want in labs, basically, to build, to get inspired with. And so I would love, maybe in this topic of artificial intelligence that we are in now, if some of you, and I would love it to be a discussion, have maybe specific examples that might be shared to the audience and to the people so that we know it can have a real impact and not just, get lost in the hype of AI. Does any one of you has maybe a specific example of an AI application that has a potential tremendous power for society? I hope so. Yeah. For instance, I know that at the United Nations in June, there was the Commission AI for Good at ITU, in which you were present. And the idea was to see how AI can basically help the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and assist UN agencies to figure out major problems as education that you mentioned. And I think it was a great experience to show positive view of this.
Yes, I think you pick education. I think that's a great example. And when you think about it, people have been trying to use AI for education now for almost 50 years. And they have largely failed. And why is that? Well, it's pretty clear when you think about it in retrospect. The AI systems knew nothing about the subject matter they were trying to teach, and they had no language in common with the students that they were trying to teach. And they were deaf and dumb. So in that situation, it's quite hard to teach people. It'd be like me going to Cambodia and trying to teach molecular biology. I don't know Cambodian, and I don't know anything about molecular biology. It would be really hard for me to be a successful teacher. But those things are changing, right? We now have pretty good speech recognition. We have the beginnings of language understanding. And we can build knowledge systems that can accommodate knowledge of chemistry or physics. And I think with some real effort, which at the moment is not coming forward, because I think this is one of those areas like antibiotics, where large corporations don't see a big financial return in the near future. But if we had a real effort, I think we could have really high quality, individualized tutoring education for the 2 billion children in the world who currently don't have access to good education. So I think that would be a fantastic thing. Yeah. Another big area is to interpret satellite data. We have now thousands of satellites in geosynchronous orbit with good coverage of every square meter of the world every day. And using that, if you have the right interpretation skills, you can understand what's happening with crops, what's happening with water, what's happening with deforestation, what's happening with conflict, and you can really help solve a lot of these development goals, because it's always been not a problem of lack of resources to solve the goals. It's lack of knowledge, lack of information about where is the problem, what is the problem, and getting the resources to the right places at the right times. And just to give one example that my students have been involved in, which is quite topical given the current activities of North Korea, is the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. So that treaty has a verification system consisting of hundreds of seismic stations that are spread around the world. And the seismic stations are listening to detect any clandestine or secret nuclear explosions. And using AI techniques, we've been able to increase the sensitivity of that system by a factor of 10, with the same detection stations, but just much better interpretation of the data. And that really changes the game in terms of how successful the verification regime will be. And we might even be able to convince the United States to ratify the treaty that they themselves proposed in 1958.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these concrete examples. Yeah, sorry.
Some comments. First, before answering, I'd like to comment on your anecdote about the sci-fi stories looking all the same. It's generally speaking, when you have connection and exchanges and so on are ambivalent towards creativity, because connections between people give new ideas by discussion, but on the other hand, it can homogenize. If there is too much connection, then you get same thing. And maybe we've got a bit in round about imaginary, about always same stories, communicating each other, and maybe people will come up with real new stories if they are a bit out of the main buzz and so on. Now, to talk about applications. So far, the AI systems are very good at reproducing things that we can teach them. For instance, we teach how to recognize objects, and then they can recognize objects. And you may say, okay, they recognize objects in the same way as we can, or a bit better. In some cases, it can make enormous difference when it comes to bring that skill to somebody who cannot. And typical example on which there are demonstrations available is for blind people, mechanisms explaining automatically what is going on. There is some person here and there it goes perfect. You train with humans who can see, and then the knowledge can be brought automatically to humans who cannot see. Other example of such kind of human skill that you can bring is treating children with this or that disease, or recognizing the disease in places when there are no doctors. There are big programs like this currently in India, for instance, for diagnosis of terrible traumas on the eyes and so on, and in places in which there are just no doctors who are skilled enough to recognize and so on. And there you have these programs of automatic image who do the same kind of recognition that a skilled human doctor could do. So already now, the AI things can bring some human-based knowledge to places in which these cognition abilities or skills are not present. It's quite more difficult to imagine the things that AI will be able to do which are out of our training skills and competence and whatever. Maybe that is the most exciting, but maybe they will learn to help us with, I don't know, our cognitive mechanisms, our brain in ways that we don't yet suspect, or that will demand try and error and so on.
Thank you so much. Maybe, Steffi, we would love to shift the conversation from AI to nanotech, even if everything is kind of converging in these times. Can you maybe first kind of, I don't know, maybe define the area of nanotechnologies that interests you, and also the reason why we have the same feeling of amazing and tremendous opportunities and fears at the same time?
I don't think we actually need to do that far a shift, Alex, because some of the things that we now observe for nanotechnology and nanotechnology is a lot older than AI as a buzzword, and I think the oldest one that we probably have as a topic underlying this debate is biotechnology, and then nanotechnology came. The one thing that we always see in these is that they are technologies which can be applied anywhere and which help a number of different industrial sectors. So they're so-called, for our jargon, they are general purpose technologies. You can find them after a while everywhere. And the best thing about it is if you don't actually have to point to them anymore and say, that is nanotech or that is biotech, because what really counts is the solutions they're providing to a problem that arose. And it doesn't really matter if you fish your best solution out of nanotech or biotech or communications technology, you provide a solution that is the best and most sustainable one for that context. And I think what Stuart said earlier about being able to use AI in the developing world, being able to provide education to people, is a very good example on how we can provide solutions to, you mentioned sustainability goals being achieved. We can provide solutions to what we observe as the growing divide between the rich and the poor. And we need to do that in a very clever manner. Coming back to nanotechnology, I see that very much as the link between the noughts and ones of the digital world, of what AI is providing suggested solutions for, and what needs to be done in the real world with materials. So with nanotech, we are really down at the atomistic level, and what we can do these days, and that is a very impressive thing, is we can use so-called digital twins of something. So if you want a new material developed that is more sustainable, that has better properties, you develop a digital twin alongside it, and you have the power of AI, the power of digitalization to calculate a prediction for you and a model for you, and you have the sensory element of nanotechnology to, at the very low scale, measure every one of the properties that you need to see fulfilled. And that serves, minimizes resources that we might need. It minimizes time. It also means we don't need to do a lot of trial and error anymore. And the best thing about it is we can even do that for the safety of the materials, and we can predict the wider impact of those. And that is where the two are intimately connected.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, Alexandre. I will have to leave in just 30 seconds to go and conduct a new round of auditions on augmented human, which is also in our subject. Before leaving, one last thought that you may be free to comment and discuss. When you ask experts worldwide about their fears about fundamental sciences, they will tell you worldwide that the main danger on this field is boredom, and the fact that it's difficult to convince young people to go into such a field which is demanding, long studies, and exciting, but what kind of reward of return on investment do you get, and so on. And in every country you see these numbers of students in science going down and down, and there are programs to fight against this. How can AI help us about this, which is a problem about ourselves, about audacity, about will of young people to change the world through long studies and going in such roads as scientists? That's a question I have no answer to. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cedric. Actually, I wanted to ask you a very last question. Why did you go from science to basically tackling this question with the government? And this is something you have in common with Steffi in the end, with coming from the lab to public policy.
I think you heard the vibrant speech and manifesto of Laurent moments ago about technology being politics. And I am convinced that it's important that in government you do have some people who are experts in this or that, and some of them being experts in science, to be able to discuss these things.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't want to keep you more. Thank you so much for this. And actually, this is also a very last question I have for you. You have the same background in the end, coming from chemistry and then from a research lab to public policy and OECD. Do you feel the same way?
I don't think there is anything left to say. I think we actually had the best pitch about that from Laurent, in that I think Cedric and I are probably, and just because we're sitting here, we are the best example of the merger between scientists and politicians, and we really do need that. There's still far too few in that area. It's getting more and more complex. You sometimes really need to know the subject matter that you're about to pass a governance model on or some regulation on.
Yeah. There's something that, I love a sentence from Professor Xavier in X-Men. So he says, we should end the war before it begins. Like, end the war before it begins. And in the end, what I feel is interesting is, if we have dystopian views of the future, it might be also a great way to think about maybe regulation, ethics, and ways with which we could turn these negative thoughts into positive action. I know that you are, Laurent, really interested in the consequences of AI and the fact that your latest book is on the subject of education in the end. how can we get prepared for the worst case scenario and help today in every classroom, basically, have a human compatible AI program. Is it something you want to talk about, the importance of education today?
Yes. We will enter a very complex world. We must live with different kinds of AI, and it will be very difficult to manage the complex zoo of the different forms of intelligences. Different artificial intelligence and different kind of human intelligence. We must prepare children, our children and our grandchildren, to manage this world with very different forms of intelligence. That's supposed to change radically the way educational system works today. We need specialists of AI in schools, not in order to change the methods, but the goals of educational system. I'm sorry. If not, children coming from haute bourgeoisie will be the winner in the future world, and people coming from other social reasons will be the losers, and we will get a double-tier universe, a double-tier society with huge inequalities. We must refuse this nightmare. We must organize the revolution in education tomorrow morning.
Thank you. We will just, yeah. So we have a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. Do you want to add something to open up the conversation? Maybe even introduce your session of this afternoon?
So I think I have a slightly more optimistic view of politicians. Generally speaking, I found, from the level of the United Nations Secretary General, the UK Prime Minister, the German Prime Minister, the Japanese government, the EU, everybody wants to know what they should do about AI. Everyone wants to know what are the future prospects for employment. If those prospects are not good, what can they do to reshape their society, their education system, and so on to avoid the possibly negative social consequences of this. So there is no lack of awareness that this is a big thing that's happening. And they are asking the AI community, okay, you guys are telling us that you're about to have success in creating something we might call human-level AI. What should we do about it? And I would say it's really a failure of the AI community to explain or even to decide what the right steps are and what the consequences will be, because the AI community has spent 60 years just defending the proposition that eventually we might succeed, but at the same time failing to produce the goods. And we've almost sort of got out of the habit of thinking about success. Now that we are starting to have success, and I think we will have more success in future, we're still some way from human-level AI, but it's probably going to happen. We haven't thought through the consequences, and I think it's an obligation on us to give good advice through our professional societies, through our writing, through your communication with the media, what are the right answers.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I think this conversation might have lasted for a day. I would have loved to. Unfortunately, we don't have more time. So thank you so much again, Steffi, Stuart, and Laurent, for this moment. Cedric, also, if he hears us. Thank you so much, and see you soon.